Hi everyone. So this video is going to be a very quick review of Unit 4. So it's Unit 4 in 15 minutes or less. So I'm just going to mention some of the sort of broad topic areas, give you a few reminders and review. But what you'll want to do is as we go through, I've got a topic slide. You might want to pause the video and just see what you think about for that topic, what kinds of things you remember. You also might want to, as we go through the topics, start a list of things that you need to look up or things that, you kind of remember that you want more details on, okay? So this is not the end-all be-all of Unit 4, but it's just a good overview of the main topics. Okay, so Unit 4 was Earth Systems and Resources. And so we're going to start with topic 4.1, which is plate tectonics. Okay, and so the main descriptor here is that you want to be able to understand geological changes and events that occur at convergent, divergent, and transform plate boundaries. So here's where you can pause and think about, do you remember what each of these are and what kinds of things happen at those boundaries? All right. And so just some review, remind yourself about the crust, mantle, and core. You also might want to think about the lithosphere and the asthenosphere. Here's our different boundaries. So divergent means they're diverging, they're going apart. And this can then result in seafloor spreading, rift valleys if it's on land, and then lines of volcanoes or earthquakes where this is happening. Transform plate boundaries, so this is like California, is where they are sliding against each other and creating that friction. So remember, they get kind of held up, and then when they break free, you get the earthquake. And then convergent plates are pushing together. And depending on whether that's seafloor or continents, you get different things. You could get mountains like the Himalayas, or you could get those island arcs, or the deep subduction trenches where one plate is moving underneath the other one. All right, and here's our plate tectonic map, and you can kind of remind yourself where the different boundaries are. Remember, you should know what this area of the Pacific is called, all right, where there's a lot of volcanic and other types of activity. All right, topic 4.2 is we're going to soil formation and erosion. So these are the main things you want to think about. Can you describe the characteristics and formation of soil? Can you describe wind and water erosion, how the soil filters and cleans the water? And then can you come up ways to help conserve the soil and sort of prevent especially the erosion from happening? All right, so here is our soil diagram. So you might want to review the different horizons and what happens at each. So you might want to remember O for organic material. E is where there's leaching that's occurring. So this A is your top soil layer. All right, and you can finish thinking about those things. Soil conservation. So here are the main things. So you should in your mind get a picture of what these are. If not, go back and look. Can you describe crop rotation, contour farming, terracing, intercropping? Can you describe what a shelter belt is and where it might be used? And then what is reduced or no-till agriculture? So how each of those things contributes to soil conservation and what they are. Okay, topic 4.3, we're sticking with our soil. And now we're thinking about the soil composition and properties. So can you describe similarities and differences between properties of different soil types? So do you remember what soil is made up of? So there's 3 particle sizes we want to remember. And depending on the proportion of soil, the proportion of each in the soil, you're going to have different characteristics. So remember, we did a big lab on this. All right, so just a few things. You might want to review how to use the soil triangle. So remember, we're going to look at percent clay. These are the smallest particles, followed by silt, and then sand, which is the biggest. Okay, and we want basically kind of an even distribution so that we're in this loam range. That's typically thought of as the best soil in that it has those good properties where it drains just enough so it doesn't get waterlogged, but it doesn't retain water, or it doesn't drain too fast like sand would. Okay, so remember how to use that, and then think about how these particles affect things like water holding capacity. Remind yourself about the porosity, what the porosity of soil is, and permeability, and how those are affected by particle sizes. You might want to go back and review some of the tests so we can test soil for biological, physical, and chemical properties. All right, and all of these things help us decide basically our fertilizer use, when to apply it, what kind of irrigation requirements, what kind of crops are going to grow best in that particular soil type. So again, go back and review that soil lab is really a good place to see all those things. All right, topic 4.4, we're now switching to the Earth's atmosphere. So there's a lot of different things in this unit. Can you describe the structure and composition of Earth's atmosphere? Do you remember your mnemonic about the different layers of the atmosphere? Okay, so if you didn't, here are our layers. So troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and then remember the exosphere is even higher up. You should know about temperature changes, right? You're also going to decrease pressure as you go up. And then this picture shows a couple of things that happen kind of in each layer. So the ones that we focus on a lot are what's happening in the troposphere. So this is where a lot of weather is going to occur. It's also, remember, where we have ozone pollution. So this is the bad type of ozone. And we're actually going to talk about this more next week. And then the stratosphere, remember, this is the good kind of ozone that happens in the ozone layer. So this protects from UV light. Also remind yourself about the composition. What is the atmosphere made up of? So the major gas, remember, is actually nitrogen. But go back and look at nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide proportion. And then we just talked about the layers and kind of what's happening in each layer. All right. Can you tell me about global wind patterns? So can you explain how environmental factors result in atmospheric circulation? So what causes the wind patterns? So that's going to be basically solar radiation, which is hitting different areas of the earth, is warming up the atmosphere and causing these wind patterns. Can you think about those 3 cells that we talked about and where areas are going to be drier and where areas are going to have more precipitation? So let's look. So energy from the sun is distributed through the global system of atmospheric and ocean circulation that creates the Earth's climate. Remember the difference between weather and climate. Weather is short term. Climate is longer term patterns. All right, in the beginning of the year, we talked about the greenhouse effect. So you should at least know some basics about that. And then remind yourself what the Coriolis effect is. So that's going to sort of shift the winds as the Earth is rotating. Okay, and here are our diagrams. So there are 3, so there's Hadley cells, Ferrel cells, and polar cells. I wouldn't worry too much about the exact names. Remember, you're going to be able to use your notes, but you should understand what's happening. So when the 2 come together, so you're at the equator where it's warming up, the air's rising. As it cools, you get a lot of precipitation in this area. Then you have this cool, dry air descending 30 degrees south and north of the equator, and these are going to be drier areas on the map, okay? And then the same thing happens with the Ferrel and polar cells. So these kind of describe where you see some of those wetter areas and drier areas. So where do the biomes occur? Where do you see deserts more often? All right, and then also notice these are the wind patterns. So this is the effect of the Coriolis effect. So we get these westerlies, all right, and then the northeast trade winds in our hemisphere. And then there's this area of the doldrums we talked about. Okay, topic 4.6, watersheds. So this is actually thrown in here. I think we talked about it more when we were talking about water use, but can you define a watershed? Do you know what area encompasses a watershed? And the curriculum basically talks about being able to describe a watershed using these characteristics. So the area, the length, So again, what area does it encompass? The slope, what type of soil, what type of vegetation, and then how, where the divides are between adjoining watersheds. All right, topic 4.7. This is dealing with solar radiation and the Earth's seasons. So we're kind of coming back to that, a little bit of the atmospheric idea. So can you explain how the sun's energy affects the Earth's surface? So in particular right now, could you explain to me why we have seasons and what's happening at each of those seasons? So why, what is shifting as we go from winter through summer? Okay, so here's the diagram that kind of explains that. So at the equator, where the sunlight's directly overhead, it goes through less of the atmosphere because of the angle, and it also is going to have more sunlight per unit area. So this is going to be the warmest area. Up at the poles, right now it's going through more of the atmosphere, so the atmosphere is absorbing more of the energy, and there's less sunlight per unit of surface area. So these are then going to absorb less of that thermal energy. All right, don't forget though, the Earth is also tilted. So this is why we get seasons. So the equinoxes are when we're going to get even 12 hours of sun, 12 hours a day, 12 hours of night, and the sun is basically at the equator. The December solstice, now it's shifted. So in the northern hemisphere, we have the shortest day, all right? And then in the June solstice, notice the sun now is directly a little bit north of the equator. So now this is when we have summer, and this is the longest day. All right, so do you remember that Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn? So that plays a role in how we see the seasons. Make sense? Okay, 2 more topics to go. Topic 4.8, Earth's geography and climate. So can you describe how the Earth's geography affects weather and climate? And the 2 things here to think about is basically that weather and climate are affected not only by the sun's energy, but by geologic and geographic factors. So mountain ranges or the ocean temperature. So right away, ocean temperature, hopefully you're thinking about that Gulf current, right? The Gulf Stream that's taking warm water and it's shifting it north and over towards Europe. So places like England are going to be a lot warmer than they would be without that ocean current, all right? Also, can you describe what a rain shadow is? We talked briefly about this, but for instance, you have coastal mountains here. If you have warm, moist air, as it's going to go rise over the mountain, rising air cools and condenses, so you have precipitation on this side, but then that dry air that advances down the other side is creating that rain shadow. All right, and our last topic is El Nino and La Nina. All right, so what do you remember about those? Can you describe the environmental changes and effects that result from these events? And remember, the whole cycle is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Okay, so remember, this is a shift in basically the winds, which then shift where the warm areas in the ocean are. Okay, so I'll let you pause this and read through it. I want to show you basically the diagram that makes it easier to explain. So normally, so this is, here's the US and here's South America. So normally what we have is the winds are pushing the warm water westward, right, towards Asia. And that leaves this cold water upwelling along the coast to replace that warm water that's being pushed the other direction. This is nutrient-rich water that's really important for fisheries. And it also keeps this a little drier and this a little wetter over here. During El Nino events, the westerly winds let up and this warm water drifts back towards South America. So it decreases the upwelling event here. All right, and it may affect weather patterns where there might be more precipitation here, and in Asia you may have drier areas. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I actually made it in 15 minutes, and I didn't rush you through that last slide, which I usually do. But remember, that's just the highlights. So you should be able to tell me more details. Could you explain these things to somebody else? And again, focus on causes and effects and solutions, and you'll be good to go. All right, see you next time.